world-renowned criminal defense attorney, Neil Rockheim.
So this is Neil Rockheim, and welcome to another edition of Killer Cross-Examination. It's a podcast where I try to help you get more justice in the courtroom, more justice in your own lives. And for weeks upon weeks, it was really just me sharing war stories, talking about different cross-examination strategies, different stories from the courtroom. Some were funny, some were sad. We talked about criminal justice issues. And then as the podcast progressed, it seemed only natural that I should attempt to bring to you some of the great storytellers and great legal minds in and around the country. And for the first three guests that we had Jeff Lickman from New York, we had F. Lee Bailey, who needs really no introduction, and we ended up the last interview that we did, we interviewed Mark Garagos. All those interviews are available on our podcast on killercrossexamination.com, on YouTube. And if you can tell, I'm a bit amped up. It's because I am we're now interviewing who we don't have to look so far outside of the state of Michigan for really amazing, talented lawyers. And so my guest this week is Attorney General Dana Nessel. She really doesn't need any introduction. If you turned on MSNBC or CNN and maybe even Fox News, any one of those channels, you'll have seen her time and time again, fighting back against injustice, fighting for civil rights. And I'm going to talk to her about some of those battles. But I have known Attorney General Nessel. I think I called her Dana. I've known her, I think, probably back from the West Bloomfield High School days or just thereabouts or shortly after that. And I wanted to have Dana on because she is really sort of my generation, our generation of leader. But many of you don't know that despite all of her accomplishments as the Attorney General in Michigan, she was one hell of a trial lawyer. And I want to talk to her about the transition from being a prosecutor, from being a defense lawyer to a prosecutor, her personality, and all the things in between. So Dana, welcome to Killer Cross-Examination. You know, I'm a big fan.
Neil, thanks so much for having me. I have to say, I'm very impressed with your guest list. So I just feel lucky to be included among some of these others that you've had on your podcast. It's really incredible.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's really been a lot of fun. It's been amazing interviewing some of these legends. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you was because I really felt like the podcast, this podcast can't appear as though the only powerful powerhouse lawyers that exist in the country are men, because that's just not true. I presume you agree with that.
I absolutely agree with that.
So, I really couldn't think of a better person to start with to get really a sort of the perspective on what it's like to be a young lawyer, to be a young female lawyer, and to have your personality. And I want to sort of explain what I mean by that. I think you have a great personality, but you don't pull any punches. And so what was it like? Were you treated differently as a young trial lawyer? Let's start with where did you begin your career as a lawyer?
So when I was a student at Wayne State University Law School, I really wanted to be a trial attorney. And I had, I'd clerked various different places in civil law firms, which I'll be honest, I found incredibly boring. But there was an internship at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office that was available. And so I applied for it, and I just fell in love with criminal law at that point and didn't want to do anything else. And when I graduated from law school, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office was the only place I applied. I would have been devastated.
So you applied right out of law school to the prosecutor's office?
I did before I even took the bar exam, actually. They used to have a process where you had to take a test that was similar to the bar exam, only had topics that would have been relevant to criminal law, constitutional law, evidence, obviously crim law, crim pro. And I applied there.
What was the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office like when you applied?
Firstly, Wayne County has about half of the felonies that are charged in the state of Michigan are charged in Wayne County. And, for better or for worse, it obviously it encapsulates Detroit. Wayne County encapsulates places like Highland Park and Ecorse and Inkster, and a lot of areas that unfortunately have, a lot of criminal activity, or at least they did then. And on one hand, obviously, that's very difficult for those communities. But on the other hand, as a young prosecutor, it really allowed you to begin trying very, very big cases very early in your career. And it's not good, of course, to be in a community where there are 300 to 400 homicides in a year, but it is if you're a prosecutor that wants to try murder cases.
Is that what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I wanted to try the most impactful and most interesting cases I could as early as I could. And in fact, during law school, my third year as a clerk, I probably spent more time in the courtroom than I did in law school. And I got to participate in the trial of Benjamin Atkins, who was the Highland Park serial killer, and who had been charged and was convicted of raping and murdering 11 women, and at the time was known as the fastest moving serial killer in American history, because he killed all of those women in the space of a year. And apparently most serial killers like to sort of, extend things out a little bit more. They like to space it out. So, it was obviously a very big deal, not just in the city of Detroit and Highland Park, where the murder victims were found, but it was a national story, and I got to be in the courtroom every day. And in fact, at one point, the prosecutor who was handling the case, a guy by the name of Mike Reynolds, that you probably know, he decided it would be a good idea to use me as sort of the model for the victim who got away, who ID'd, and turned this guy into the police, to show the exact method that this individual used to asphyxiate and murder all of his victims, and thought it'd be a good idea to demonstrate that on me. And during the course of the proceedings, she actually got carried away and started to strangle me, and actually lifted me off the ground and was strangling me in front of the jury. And it was Judge David Kerwin who had to finally yell, because it was clear that I was actually, going to pass out. Mike Reynolds was delighted by this, because it was great courtroom theater. I was less delighted because it was on CNN, and that's to this day, that was my starring role, was being almost asphyxiated to death on national television. So I was very excited.
So how long did that trial last?
Several months. It was a very unusual defense. And it was sort of a combination, per the request of Benjamin Atkins, of I didn't do it, but if I did, I was insane. So it was multiple different defenses. Jeff Edison was the defense attorney.
Great lawyer.
He was a well-known defense attorney, a great lawyer. But it was over the course of several months. It was a really interesting case, but that was sort of the beginning of my career.
Did you know before that, or did you know during that trial that this trial work and being in the courtroom was for you?
Well, I mean, honestly, I got addicted to it as soon as I started, having the ability to, sit in the courtroom and sit at the prosecutor's table, with various different prosecutors. But what's interesting to me, which is something that you talked about in the beginning, is developing your personality as a trial attorney. And I remember watching this very well-known prosecutor in court when I was someone well-known to you. I'm sure her name is Lindsay. She's probably tried as many of the biggest criminal cases in Michigan as a prosecutor as any other prosecutor. But I remember she has a very specific style that's in keeping with her personality. And I remember when my first trial, I tried to emulate her, even though she and I are nothing alike. And I remember the judge saying to me at the end of this trial in 36th District Court that it wasn't working for me. Let's just say I was trying to be somebody that I wasn't. And the judge did say, just be yourself. This is not you. That might be someone else that you watched or that you know, but it's not you. It's not working for you. And it was a lesson that I took away.
What is Lisa's style? Because I know she's aggressive. She's known for being an aggressive lawyer. At least that's what I know of her.
She is very aggressive. Yes.
Is she sarcastic?
She really goes.
Is she just serious? Is she snarky?
She's a little bit of all of those things, but let's just say that, I think for me personally, I mean, like I said, for better or for worse, I'm a little bit sarcastic. And when I hear something that is incredulous to me, I make it well known to whoever I'm trying to communicate that to. And I will tell you the story that I was trying. It was actually a family law case. It was a divorce case, which rarely do those get tried. But I was trying one in front of Judge Kathleen McCarthy, who's the chief judge of the family division in the Wayne County Circuit Court. And I could not believe the things that this defendant was testifying to, because it was just lie after lie after lie, and demonstrably so. And as I was cross-examining this defendant, the judge stopped me and she said, "Miss Nessel, do you think that when you're speaking, you could sound a little less sarcastic?" And I said, "Honestly, Judge, I don't think so. I think my voice just sounds like this now. I can't even help it, because, I was so bewildered at the words coming out of this witness's mouth, who was under oath, that sometimes you just can't help yourself. It just takes over." But,
so let me ask you, so when you were, as you developed your style, so it sounds like, how would you characterize, let's talk about in your days as a prosecutor, was that when you sort of were developing your style in the courtroom? Is that when you think you kind of sharpened it and honed it, or did that not come until you were in private practice?
No, I mean, everybody changes a little bit as they get more experience. And no, but I mean, as I was saying about the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, I mean, we tried so many cases that you really, in a short period of time, became more experienced as a trial attorney than, most people who had been practicing their entire careers, because you just, there were months where I'd start a jury trial on Monday. We'd sort of wrap it up on a Wednesday. That jury would go out, a new panel would come in on Thursday. That would go until, whatever, Monday, Tuesday, then the next one would come in, and you'd have no break. Sometimes you'd have to try to remember what the facts of your case were, because you would confuse it with the case that you just tried the day before. And so, when you're doing anything that much, I think you sort of develop whatever your rituals are, whatever your style is. And maybe it changes over time, but
what were your strengths? Like, some people are really good at voir dire and connecting with the jury. Some are very good at opening, and some are logical, some are funny, some are very good at cross. What were your strengths in the courtroom?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that I was pretty proficient at cross-examination. I really enjoyed the sort of build-up, the slow build-up of getting witnesses to concede certain things before you then sort of tried to dismantle whatever, their testimony was, if that was appropriate for that witness. But, I think the hardest part, honestly, always the hardest part for me, was the opening, because I got so used to the fact that I never knew what witnesses would say on the stand, no matter how long I had studied whatever it was that they testified to in the preliminary examination, or what their witness statements were, or how many times I had spoken to those witnesses and talked to them about whatever they were going to testify to. There were always so many surprises that you really had to try hard not to be too specific during the course of your opening, because you knew it would never be the same information in the closing. You would never have that. So you had to be so general.
When did you transition from the prosecutor's office to private practice, and what made you do that?
So I was a prosecutor for approximately 11 years as an APA, as an assistant prosecuting attorney. And then I left to go into private practice. And I mean, I'll be very blunt about it. I left because I had found myself as a single mother to, to two young children. And as much as I really enjoyed my work as a prosecutor, it's just, there was only so far you could go in terms of what the pay scale was. And in Wayne County, as time went on, our health insurance changed, pension changed, and all the benefits that you get out of public service started to erode, but they were not compensated for by your salary. And being that I was a single parent and knowing just how extraordinary my childcare costs were, it just became impossible. I was not going to be able to save for my retirement and for my kids to go to college at the same time. And I felt like I had to make more money. And
it's a common
so
story, I think. I think that, unfortunately, I think a lot of prosecutors' offices and attorney general offices have lost very good trial lawyers and dedicated lawyers who really wanted to stay, not because of politics, but because of the financial circumstances of their lives. Do you agree? I mean, what can be done about that?
I mean, we have to pay public servants what they're worth. And I should say this, we should be paying public defenders the exact same thing that we pay prosecutors. We shouldn't value one of those professions more than the other. They're both equally important to the criminal justice system and to justice as a whole in America. And so that always bothered me a lot to see that. I don't know how people could afford to stay as public defenders for very long. But yeah, I mean, definitely as time went on, it got a lot more challenging. And the way things worked, at least in Wayne County when I was there, is there was really, if you hadn't negotiated a new contract through your union, there was only so high you could go, and then that was it. You were done. And when I was done, I mean, short of having been promoted to management, I was 35 years old, and I was never going to make any more money than I was making when I was 35. That's pretty dire, set of circumstances.
So let me go back to your shift to criminal defense. Was it like you left on a Friday, you were done as a prosecutor, and then on a Monday you were on your own, or did you take some time off in between?
No, I didn't have any time for time off. I started right away. Initially, I was planning on doing mostly 1983 actions involving, excessive use of force cases and officer-involved shootings, in custody deaths, things of that nature that were civil. That was my initial plan, because one of my assignments while I had been at the prosecutor's office was in the public integrity unit. So I'd handle those cases as a prosecutor. And what I got kind of tired of is, it was so much work to investigate and then in some cases charge police officers that had committed wrongdoing. And what would routinely happen is I would look in the back of the courtroom, and just as I was getting my guilty verdict, I would see the civil attorney sort of, shaking hands with the insurance carrier. And I'd be like, that civil attorney just made 10 times as much as I'll ever make in my career. And all he did is sit and watch me try this case. And so I want to be that guy, I want to be the one.
Did you start off doing those cases? Did you find that you got them? Were you able to get those cases and to make a career out of those, at least in the beginning?
Well, I did. And I was working with another attorney at first, a guy by the name of Ben Gonick, who, practiced in that area. But what I found out pretty quickly was, first of all, there was definitely a nexus between handling 1983 cases and handling criminal law cases, because so often you'd have people who were charged in connection with, a use of excessive force case or what have you. But also, I have to say, I did not enjoy practicing civil law nearly as much as I enjoyed practicing criminal law. And I found myself really wanting to get back into the courtroom, trying criminal cases. It's very, very rare that the civil cases will actually go to trial. So I missed that. And also, I know it sounds strange, but the collegiality and the camaraderie between prosecutors and defense attorneys was very different to me than what I saw in the civil realm. In the civil realm,
what do you mean? What do you mean?
I mean, attorneys were just mean to each other. I mean, they did. I don't know how I was so surprised because I'm not saying as, you know, in criminal court, you don't have your adversaries, because you do. You always have, if you're a prosecutor, you always have the criminal defense attorney that you don't get along with here or there. Or as a criminal defense attorney, you always have, you know, a few prosecutors that have a real attitude you don't enjoy having a case with. But for the most part, I felt like we really got along with each other. But when I started practicing civil law, I was like, especially when you start doing depositions, because there's no judge in there.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because when I was a young prosecutor many, many years ago, I'd sit in the courtroom waiting for my cases to be called. And on Wednesdays, which were the days that the Oakland County had all of their motions up, these civil lawyers would be in there, and they would be arguing over who sent a fax, what time the fax was sent, what was said, what was in an order, what wasn't. And we would sit there after a while and just like, and the judges would just get so frustrated that some judges would just lose their temper. You know, almost like want to give them a timeout.
What was incredible to me is when I started practicing family law, not really because I had any great love for it, but the honest to God truth was I needed to make a living. And there was just, it was easier to get family law cases sometimes where you had paying clients than criminal law cases where you had paying clients. And I found myself in a position where it was easier for me to convince my client that it was a good idea to plead from a murder 1 to a murder 2, where they were going to get 35 years in prison, than it was for me to convince, you know, a teacher or an engineer that they should take Mondays and Wednesdays of parenting time instead of Tuesdays or Thursdays. I mean, for real, I felt I
get it.
My clients, and, you know, when I'm, as a criminal defense attorney, I felt that my clients were so much more understanding and logical and reasonable than when I practiced in civil law, especially family law, where people just were very unreasonable much of the time, and it made your job very frustrating.
So you've tried a lot of cases. When you were trying cases, were you like a preparer? Are you someone that just prepares and dots all the I's and T's and triple checks or are you someone who more goes by kind of the seat of your pants, so to speak?
Yeah, I always believe that the best lawyer is often the most prepared lawyer. And because there's just no time to react to things, you really have to commit all the facts of the case to memory. If you're going to do an effective cross-examination, you have to know the second that you hear something that is different than what was in a police report or what was in a preliminary exam or, you know, what was in any previous hearing that you had. So what I would always try to do is, you know, I would make, you know, notes and notes and notes about every detail of every, you know, portion of a case. But I'd wake up early in the morning before court that day and try to get to court as early as possible if I could. And just try in my mind to remember all the facts and all the details that one witness who was about to testify had already talked about in whatever capacity, so that I could bring it up that second. And, you know, I really think that, and again, it's great to be stylistically good and it's great to be sharp, but if you don't really know what is in all of those documents, you can't be effective at your job. You have to be very prepared, or you're going to miss something.
What's the best cross-examination? If I were to say to you right now, take me back to one that just stands out, and you'll probably get off the call and think the one that I told Neil about, it really isn't the one that stands out the most. There's 3 others you'll think of, but if I can spark a memory right now, which one in your mind stands out? Even if it was 5 questions or if it was 5 hours, which one stands out the most, and tell me why?
So I have one that I will tell you, everyone in the courtroom will probably remember. Gosh, I'm sorry. It's hard working from home when you have people come to the door.
That's okay.
So it was a murder case that I was trying in front of Judge Bill. And what I remember was that it was a woman who I was trying this as a prosecutor, and it was a woman who she was a petite and sort of dainty looking young woman, but my theory of the case is that she had she had stabbed her boyfriend to death while he was sleeping, actually passed out, and stabbed him multiple times in the back. And she had a background that was very violent, but nothing that could be used really to impeach her exactly. And when she started testifying here, I thought this would be an open and shut case. I mean, the guy was stabbed multiple times in the back, but she presented so well that I was like, oh my God, I think I could lose this case. So in my mind, I was like, I have to make her angry so that people see that side of her, because no one will ever believe that, it was a self-defense defense that she was, asserting. And I thought A, have to make her mad, and B, okay, and I don't know if you learned this in law school, Neil, you want to say in law school, but I had always been taught, and in the back of my mind, is that you can make someone look like a murderer if you place the murder weapon in their hand. Then the jury will start to see them as murderer. Well, this was not, typically when you do that with a gun, you have the deputies inspect it and make sure that, it's,
and it's in a box, and it's got
right.
Everybody's checking it out 15 times, and right.
Exactly. So, but this is a knife, and here this is a woman who I know she's got a temper from various other things, but the jury doesn't, because she's presenting so well. And I was like, I have to make the jury see her as a murderer. So I go up and I'm like, all right, well, why don't you show us exactly? Because she was claiming that she stabbed him in such a manner that she was swinging the knife around and got him in the back multiple times. It really made no sense at all whatsoever. But I knew that the jury would come to understand that, I hoped, if she sort of demonstrated. Anyway, so I give her the knife and I go, why don't you come down here and show me how you stabbed this guy to death? And I'm going back and forth with her, and she's getting really angry. And finally, the judge was like, no. And basically the deputies basically had to tackle her because, and then she starts cussing, be like, I'll stab that bitch. And I was like, thank you. It's like all I needed was to get her as mad as possible.
I'll be here all week, right?
And to start swinging the knife around. And yes, she almost murdered me during the course of the case. But guess who won that case?
So the two stories that you've shared with us both involve you being somewhat attacked in the courtroom. One by your colleague, Mike Reynolds, who was choking you, and the other was the actual defendant with a knife in her hand, as basically doing what you maneuvered her into doing.
Yeah, well, actually, now that I think about it, I probably have more stories than that. I don't know why I have so many of them, but
those are good stories.
But the second one was I mean, Judge Bill will tell you to this day how horrified he was by that. But I hate to say, you get invested in your cases, though. You're willing to do anything you have.
I agree, 100%. I've given up. I agree. I've been in those moments, and you have some of those moments where, I remember a trial that I did with Carmelinga, who's now a judge, but when he was a defense lawyer, and he got on the ground and started crawling around on the ground, and I'm sitting there and I couldn't help but crack a joke. I'm like, who would have thought that, we'd be at a point where Carmelinga's on the ground on his back. I mean, and we all laughed, but I mean, it was very effective to see him get down on the ground and physically show, because it's not just a demonstration, right? It's not just it's that you're showing the jury how invested you are in your case, physically handing the knife to the accused, to the defendant, and then basically challenging her. Nobody would look at you and think Dana Nessel doesn't believe in her case. They would think that she is right. I mean, you're physically invested at that point. It's a physical cross-examination.
I have to say, though, that even though I think that, you want to see justice done, whatever that looks like, but I think just as trial attorneys, we're just very competitive people too. You just also don't want to lose. So it's, and I think what typically happens also is that you get so invested in your case. And I know this is one of the issues that we talk a lot in criminal law about, in terms of how prosecutors or investigators get into trouble, is sometimes you get tunnel vision because you so believe in your case that you can't see anything else besides the fact that you're right. You know, this individual is guilty or this individual is innocent. And I've had that both ways, where I just completely convinced myself because I got so invested into my case. But you know, when you're invested like that, you don't like to lose. And
let me ask you a question about that, because I have, I mean, I have I think a decent, I'm not going to pretend to be a psychologist but you're, not only are you competitive, but you've never, from what I've seen, backed down from a verbal joust. And which is a great quality to have in public life, and in your role as the Attorney General and in your role as a prosecutor and as a lawyer. So I have to ask, because this is and there's a reason why I'm asking, is there a double standard that you've experienced or witnessed in the legal system with female trial lawyers who are aggressive and snarky and sarcastic compared to their male counterparts?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. And I would say that was especially true early in my career. I had to be very, very careful at times, because there were definitely times where you would be considered, where if a man engaged in the same sort of courtroom antics, I will say,
he would be aggressive and assertive and tough, right?
Right. Then they're a tough lawyer. And when you're a woman and you do that, you're a bitch. I mean, honestly, you have to be careful because you don't know what jurors are going to take that the wrong way. I mean, I tried to be at least a little bit more lighthearted, and, obviously crack a joke and smile here and there.
How did you, that's what I want to know. How did you deal with that when you're looking at the jury? Because there are a lot of young lawyers, I think, out there that don't know how to deal with that. How did you deal with that with judges and with juries? How did you get a sense from when you got permission to, I don't want to say be more yourself, but how did you overcome those stereotypes so that you could really be all of the personality that you have?
I think that your personality sort of comes out whether you like it or not.
Maybe the question I didn't, what I'm saying, like, how do you avoid the jury giving you a chance, because you're tough and you're aggressive, and it's a terrible double standard. It's not fair.
Well,
so how do you get the chance to get the green light?
I think sometimes even in voir dire, I would make up my own sort of voir dire that suited my personality, and that sometimes, could be infused with a little bit of humor, so that right off the bat, you're using the voir dire to sort of get to know the jury a little bit. And there were,
give me an example if you have one.
I used to have this one sort of parable that I would use in terms of, understanding what beyond a reasonable doubt means. Because for a prosecutor, the challenge is you don't want them to think it's such an impossibly high standard that you can never meet it no matter what. So I used to have this parable, and it would involve, all right, if somebody said that, if you have somebody that works for you and they tell you that they show up for work, they're a couple hours late, and they tell you that, they missed that the bus was late. And that's the reason the bus was a couple hours late, and that's why they didn't make it in there. Does that sound plausible to you? Do you think that's something that you would believe? And most people, especially in the city of Detroit, would tell you, yeah, I've seen buses be 2 hours late, or, all the time. I would believe that. Like, all right, well, what if somebody says, hey, it's the middle of winter, and I couldn't get the battery to turn over, my car wouldn't start, my neighbor had to go jump my battery. Is that something that you think you would believe? Is that plausible? Is that believable to you? And, they'd say, yeah, sure. I mean, that makes sense. I live in Michigan. It's very cold here. That happens to me all the time. That sounds like something I'd buy. Like, okay, well, now what would happen if somebody said, hey, I was on my way out the front door, and suddenly an alien spaceship came and it flew, and it sucked me up in one of those cyber lights, and I got on there, and there were a whole bunch of aliens, and they, disrobed me, and they started poking me and prodding me in really super uncomfortable places. And it was really awkward and whatever. But then after a couple hours, they dropped me back down, got in my car, drove here. Do you think would you believe that? That would be believable, right? And they'd be like, no. And I'd be like, oh, so some things are believable, some things aren't believable, and, I would use that as sort of a, like, so
what's reasonable and what's not reasonable.
Yeah. And that there are some things that will come out in testimony that, like, when you say beyond a reasonable doubt, there's that which is reasonable. There's that's incredulous, and knowing where to draw the line between those things. And that's just something where that was my own spin on some of that.
All right. So you decided to run for Attorney General. Did you consider yourself to be the favorite or the underdog during the primary before you got the nomination? Did you view yourself as the favorite
I was the underdog from the minute that I announced up until about 3:30 a.m. the morning after the election.
So what made you decide to run for Attorney General? I mean, it's probably such a normal, you probably get asked that question all the time, but what made you decide to run?
Well, probably a number of factors. First and foremost, something that was in my mind was I was really unhappy with the way the Department of Attorney General seemed to be operating and the direction that they had taken on a number of cases, including the same-sex marriage case, which I and another attorney had brought. And I was pretty disgusted with the arguments that were being made on behalf of the state of Michigan. And also the way that
you won that case, right?
I did win that case, but we tried that case. Case, and the department spent an untold amount of money on these witnesses that were crackpots, all of whom testified, by the way, during the trial that of the reasons that same-sex couples engaged should not be allowed to adopt or marry is because they were all going to hell. I mean, those are scientific experts that were paid for with our state dollars, so that bothered me. But when I decided to run, first, really of the many reasons, it was during the Trump administration, and I had seen that state attorneys general were being very effective in combating the Trump agenda, which I did not subscribe to. I was very horrified by his policies. And I saw that in case after case after case, the state AGs were suing the federal government, getting these policies stopped in their tracks, getting national injunctions so that these policies could never go into effect. And it turned out in the cases that we ended up filing, we won over 80% of them. So that to me was very attractive, is a means to resist. If you were somebody of my mindset who was pretty horrified by Donald Trump and by his policies, I thought the best way to combat that, I could protest all day, every day, or I could be on the outside suing the government. I could sue the state government, maybe I could sue the federal government, but as state attorney general, I had jurisdiction to intervene in any case in the state, and it gave me authority, it gave me standing automatically to sue the the federal government on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan. So that was
when you became the attorney general, so you were, I don't want to misstate this, you're married, and you're in a same-sex marriage and loving marriage, and you have beautiful children. You can see the pictures behind you. Are you the first same-sex, I guess, the LGBTQ state elected, I'm not saying that.
Yes, I'm the first statewide openly gay person to hold office in the state of Michigan.
So that must be tremendously proud to have broken that glass ceiling, although it probably shouldn't have taken as long as it did. So let me ask you, where are you enjoying being the prosecutor? Because you couldn't have, or the attorney general, because you couldn't have possibly imagined that the beginning of your tenure as the attorney general would include just this rift in the country and then a pandemic. I mean, have you been able to even do some of the things that you wanted to do, or have you had to shift gears to try to combat the rift and the pandemic?
Well, I will say this, I certainly didn't plan on spending most of my second year in office in my living room. My first year, I did, I think, over 60 town halls. I really, really grew to enjoy that as a means of communicating with people, and I'd go all around the state and do that. And there were areas I was very excited about. Protecting seniors, I put together an elder abuse task force. We were working on those issues. I would do consumer protection town halls. I did some criminal justice reform town halls, and I did a lot of FOIA and OMA, Open Meetings Act, Freedom of Information Act town halls, where I would, explain to people how to use those systems in order to better access transparency in the government. So I loved that. And then of course, 2020 came and all that got shut down because I couldn't be doing those town halls anymore. You try to do them virtually to the extent you can, but it's not really the same. But I would say what 2020 brought, not just, even though I was working from home, worked harder than I've ever worked before in my life, because it was just constant in terms of whether it was price gouging issues involving products, whether it was scams that were COVID related, or whether it was defending the governor's executive orders, and then later the Department of Health and Human Services orders. That was constant. But the part that was the most challenging was defending the will of the voters in the 2020 election. I'd say that was probably the most challenging part, even in a state where Biden won by 154,000 votes. At all times, it felt as though the 16 electors in our state might not go towards him. And then the third thing I will say is I did not expect to be involved in a case where we were prosecuting individuals that were accused of attempting to kidnap and murder our sitting governor. That was also
See, and that's why it all leads. That's why I was you come full circle, because when you ran as Attorney General, you ran really as a reformer in a lot of ways, a social justice reformer, I don't want to say liberator, but in a lot of ways, liberating that office, I think, was something that I always viewed you as sort of a liberator, like, okay, we're going to open the doors and it's going to be more, the justice system is going to be fairer, and we're going to try to make it fairer. And then wham, you're hit with, you and Secretary of State Benson and Governor Whitmer are thrust into the national news on a regular basis. And then on top of that, you're now involved in these cases that that's why I'm wondering, have you been able to accomplish your agenda? What do you do? Is that just like, I'm not asking the question very well, because it just sort of hit me that you ran probably with all these things that you wanted to do, and here life kind of got in the way.
Well, definitely things have turned out so far a little differently than I anticipated. But, I think a lot of the things I initially wanted to do in terms of our elder abuse reforms, we've moved forward. We've knocked a bunch of those off in terms of the initiatives that we had, and many of those are going to the legislature now in terms of reforming the way that probate courts operate. I was very insistent on wanting to decommission Line 5, which, as you know, is the Enbridge energy pipeline that runs through the Straits of Mackinac, which I perceive to be an ongoing threat to the Great Lakes. So we've moved forward on that. In terms of criminal justice reform, I testified before the House and Senate on things like civil asset forfeiture and abolishing that, which we did. I have testified in regard to our new expungement package of bills that will allow for more people to have their records, criminal records, expunged than ever before. And when we're going to be moving forward in my department and having expungement fairs all over the state and making it as easy as possible for people to do that. So, and honestly, I argued before the Michigan Supreme Court, not for my office. I argued against my office on behalf of a criminal defendant, and I won, beating my office.
Do you miss the courtroom? Do you miss it?
Every day.
So what do you do?
Day.
How are you? Are you in touch with your line prosecutors? Are you guys, are you passing on any tips to them? how do you sort of, I don't want to say, how do you scratch that itch, so to speak, if someone that I know liked the being in the courtroom, but missing it?
Well, several things. Firstly, I probably micromanage my staff too much. So that's one. And that's the difference between me, I think, and a lot of people who run for attorney general or become attorney general in their various states, is that I wasn't a politician. I didn't come up, first I was in the legislature, or I was like on a county commissioner or what have you. I was an attorney who became an attorney general. And I think it's actually very important, because a lot of the types of cases that I'm making decisions on, I've handled those types of cases. So I actually know something about it. Certainly not in all the different areas of law, but there are many that I've actually practiced in. So when we're making reforms to the probate court, when we're talking about criminal justice, when we talk about family law, when we talk about civil rights, I've actually practiced in all these spheres. So I think it's really helpful in helping to make these decisions. But the other thing is that your skills as a trial attorney, I think, translate more than anything I can imagine to, frankly, being a politician. And I think it's noteworthy that during the course of the campaign in 2018, the general election, my Republican opponent refused to debate me, which was the first time that it happened in modern history, that the AG candidates of the two major parties did not have a debate. And of course, I tried to egg my opponent on, Tom Leonard, as many times as possible. I had a mock debate where I just had sort of a cutout board of him. And, I was really, and people said to me, you're ahead in the polls. Why would you, debates are for people who are losing and they want to score some cheap points here and there. And I'm like, because I love to debate. That's why. I'm a trial attorney. And I of course, I thought, what does that say about him that he refused to engage in a debate with me? I thought that spoke a lot about what his platform was and how good his ideas were and how receptive the public would be to it. But I still have that now on a regular basis. I probably have more public events than many AGs do, because I like interacting with the public. I like answering questions. I like engaging in a dialogue. And I do a lot of media interviews that I think not everybody does, or they spend more time sort of having to prepare and plan for them, because when you're a trial attorney, you have to, you got to pick up stuff quickly. And it's a skill that translates really well into this job. I think being, quick on your feet is really important in this position. So it's probably a reason why so many trial attorneys later on end up being, fairly decent politicians, Ted Cruz aside.
Okay. With the old jokes about Ted Cruz, that there are a lot of jokes about Ted Cruz. So a couple of last questions. So if your children said, because I hear so many lawyers say, oh, my kids want to, go into become lawyers and I'm trying to talk them out of it. Do you have that mindset?
Not at all. Neither of my kids have any interest at all in becoming attorneys. So I don't have to worry about talking them in or out of that. I will say this though, Neil. I don't know what your thoughts are, although I suspect I know what your thoughts are. I've loved being a lawyer. Some people I think look back on their lives and they're like, ugh, I could have spent my career doing something better or more interesting or something that I loved more and was more passionate about. I have really enjoyed this job all the way through. And while you don't enjoy it every single day and you don't enjoy every single case, you have enough things that you're doing that you feel you're really bringing justice to the world, that it gives you a reason to get up in the morning and get excited about what you're doing. And I can't tell you how many times I'd run through in my head, how things were going to go in trial that day or the next day, and just be so excited to get into the courtroom. And Neil, this feeling of listening to a witness testify and jumping up in your seat a little bit because you're waiting for the other attorney to sit down so that you can pop up and start questioning that person. And, it's been a great career. I've really, really enjoyed it. And this is why I tell law school students whenever I get asked, I say to them, listen, I know your temptation is going to be to take whatever job pays you the best salary or has the best benefits. And of course, especially in this era now, it's very different from when you and I were in law school, Neil. It's expensive. It's really expensive to go to law school. And of course, people have to pay back their student loans and all the rest of it. And I understand that, and I'm very sympathetic to it. But I always say, if you don't find work that you love, that is meaningful to you, you're never going to make it in this field, because you'll get burned out, in the first 10 years, and then you'll leave and you won't practice law anymore. And that's what happened with a lot of people that we went to law school with, because they didn't go into a field that they loved or cared about. And it was all billable hours all the time in areas of law that meant nothing to them. And I think that's why you and I are still practicing.
So I appreciate that, putting me in the same category as you. I do. It's high praise. I appreciate that very much. So just give us kind of a quick look ahead, 3 months, 6 months, a year for you. I mean, obviously, pandemic aside, because we never know what seems like how that's going to impact us. Your office has got some big cases, and I don't want you to talk about them, but you've got some big cases on the horizon. You've got the case obviously involving those who you've charged with attempting to do harm to Governor Whitmer. That case is still on track?
Yep. We have 8 of the defendants, and 6 of them are in the Western District, and the U.S. Attorney out there is handling them. Of our 8 defendants, 3 of them have been bound over to trial in Jackson County, and the other 5 have preliminary exams coming up in Antrim County.
And who's the prosecutor in your office that's leading up that case, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. We have 2. One is Sunitha Dadamani, who's the head of our hate crimes and domestic terrorism unit. And the second is Greg Townsend.
An old venerable name, Greg Townsend from the Oakland County days. So, and a great lawyer, and really just a great guy, but Greg knows his way around the courtroom for sure.
Yes.
And you've got a case, I believe you're prosecuting the case against former Governor Snyder as well. Is that so?
So to be fair, I just have to say that we do have a conflict wall in place, because I had to make a decision. I could only handle either the civil cases or the criminal cases.
Okay.
So I decided to handle the civil cases, and I appointed my Solicitor General, Fadwa Hamoud, and Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy to handle the criminal case.
Fair enough.
But there are, I believe, 9 defendants, including former Governor Snyder, that are, now in proceedings. There was a grand jury in that case. So technically there's no bind over, as you know. I mean,
right.
There's a probable cause finding by the grand jury, but those cases are being prepared to go to trial.
And what lies ahead for, because the city of Flint, for those who are still trying to kind of wrap their brain and arms around how it is that in 2021 we still have a city that's struggling with the aftermath of the water issues. What about the city of Flint? Is there still ongoing civil litigation? Is it over? And what's your role in that, if any?
Well, thank goodness we're wrapping it up. One of my big goals from getting into office was, I didn't want these civil cases going on for years and years. I thought as though it was very important for the state and very important for the residents of the city of Flint to have some resolution. So I worked industriously with the governor to try to come to a settlement. And I think it's important for people to remember, it's not just about what I want and what she wants. We had to sell this to the state legislature, which of course are majority Republicans. The city of Flint doesn't have any representation that are Republicans. So getting them to agree to the biggest settlement in the history of the state of Michigan was no easy task, but we did. And so we have a settlement that's been formulated for $641 million, which is, again, the biggest settlement in state history. Not all the defendants have settled. So the EPA has not yet settled, and there's a few engineering firms that are still potentially on the hook. But we've moved forward in our process, and we're hoping to have this all wrapped up pretty soon. We just had the closing date for those that had to sign up to become officially a plaintiff in the case. And we're wrapping that part up. I'm hoping that we'll have distributions this year.
It's incredible work. So I wanted to thank you. I know you have so much going on. the things you're talking about are so funny because, I know some of us, we get an OWI case and it seems to, every question in the case seems to take on a life of its own and become this giant case. And every case you're talking about, all the cases that you've talked about and the issues that you're dealing with are just so massive. It's very impressive that you're able to tackle all of that, maintain your personality, maintain the image of your office, and still, I know, because I see your Twitter feed and it's funny as hell, and you're a proud, spouse and proud parent. And so I don't know how you're doing it all, but you're certainly someone to be admired, and I have a lot of respect for you. And for you to take time out of your busy schedule and come on this podcast means a lot to me. And I hope if anybody is watching, you're an example. You're an example of what people can do if they if they set their mind to things and they want to accomplish them. Because like I said, if you had told me back in the day when it was Nessel and Kessel, by the way, we're all mad that you took Chris. We're all mad. I've been told to tell you that. You got a lot of nerve taking that guy from us, because he was one excellent lawyer, and he was a not guilty machine down in Wayne County. A not guilty machine.
Kessel is a great attorney. I have to say that I really enjoyed. We worked together for 5.5 years. At first, probably as kind of a prank, just because our names rhymed and we thought that was hilarious. But then, we became very close, and I loved working with him. And I'm very proud that he's going to be working for the department. But, let me just say this, just wrapping up, because we had, I don't want to say the same career trajectory, but we started our careers as prosecutors. And then we, worked as defense attorneys and handled a litany of different types of cases. But I always said this, when I moved from being a prosecutor to a defense attorney, I learned so much more about the criminal justice system than I ever knew, having just been a prosecutor. Things that actually saddened me greatly and made me revisit much of the work that I did as a prosecutor. As much as I always was committed to doing the right thing, there were so many times that I looked back and I thought, maybe I didn't do the right thing. And I wish I had known more. I wish I had understood things better. And I always promised that if I ever became a prosecutor again, I would be a better prosecutor the second time than I was the first. And I've really tried to bring that knowledge that I obtained at the other table and bring it back to being a prosecutor, to be a more fair and more just prosecutor. Because I think sometimes you have to sit at both tables. And I really got panned, as you probably remember, from the $10 million worth of ads against me for, every bad actor that I had ever represented in my career. But I said then, what I will say now is that we need to have more people who have experience as a criminal defense attorney sitting as the chief law enforcement officials of our states. And I'm one of only, I think, 2 people in the United States that, were criminal defense attorneys before they became state AGs. I think it's just myself and the AG of the District of Columbia, Carl Racine.
I didn't know that. That's a shocking statistic.
And so, I mean, I think that, I see all the massive injustices that were done by, frankly, some of my predecessors who I felt like didn't have the right policies in place or would have done something very different because they did not understand what it was like at the other table. And, it's an important experience to have. And I would encourage people who are criminal defense attorneys, whether you seek becoming a judge or becoming, a state senator or state representative or what have you, there was a time where if you were a criminal defense attorney, that was it. You knew that you were never going to be able to run for a political office or an elected office of any kind. And in fact, many people became prosecutors just because they knew it would look good for their resume. And I think those times are changing, but I think it's really important for just the general public to understand that experience is invaluable in understanding so many injustices that are done. And when I look at the people that I represented, the vast majority of whom were indigent, it just taught me a lot about society in a way that I didn't necessarily know sitting at the prosecutor's table. And I think I'm a better state AG because of it.
I appreciate that. I think that's excellent perspective. I've been saying for a long time, I don't like that it's the minimum requirement to be a judge. What is it, 5 years of practice? I think that people should have to, the arc should not be prosecutor, judge, that you, at some point, you should have to stand next to an individual. I'm not minimizing the value of representing the people as an entity, but I'm talking about representing an individual person and feeling the ups and downs of their life, the pain, the agony. And I think that once people have even if it's just a year or two of doing that, if you let that sink in, it has the ability, as you've talked about, to really open your eyes about how many injustices occur in the legal system. And I appreciate you, Dana, for tackling those and for sharing your life experiences here with me. And I appreciate the role model you are for a lot of people. I know a lot of people who look up to you, and I hope you continue doing what you're doing, and keep putting your gloves on every day and trying to knock out the opponent. Unless it's me, of course. But if it is me, I'm expecting you to give me your best punch too. So.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the great work that you continue to do.
I appreciate it.
Each and every day. And what a cool show to have.
Yeah, it's great. I'm so glad you came on. So